Have you ever stopped to think that nothing is permanent? It seems like a simple, even obvious idea, but it carries a depth that many of us forget in the rush of everyday life. In difficult moments, everything feels eternal, as if that weight on your chest will never go away. Sleepless nights, family arguments, the feeling of being stuck in an unchanging situation. Everything feels endless, doesn't it? But what if I told you that life, like a wheel, is always in motion? That things, no matter how hard they may seem, never stay the same. And that what seems like an impossible problem today may become nothing more than a distant memory tomorrow. Now, imagine three sisters, Sophia, Clara, and Mia. They are in the midst of the storm of their lives. Everything is falling apart around them, the endless fights with their parents, the financial problems that never seem to get resolved, and the constant feeling that they're losing their connection with each other. Each of them is carrying a heavy burden, and the stress is eating away at their relationships at home. The house that once was a refuge now feels like a prison. They're tired, exhausted from fighting with each other and with themselves. Life has lost that lightness, and every morning feels like the start of an endless cycle of anguish. It's easy, in these moments, to believe that everything is out of control, that there's no more hope or way out. But what they don't yet know, and perhaps what you haven't realized either, is that change is the only constant in life. Everything that is falling apart around them has an expiration date. One way or another, everything will change. And it is in this exact vulnerability, in this moment of despair, that something incredible is about to happen. Sophia, Clara, and Mia. Three sisters who, despite growing up in a home full of laughter and unity, can barely spend an afternoon together now without fighting. Life has thrown them in different directions, each facing their own challenges. Sophia, the eldest, always took on the responsibility of keeping the family together. But the weight of taking care of the parents' bills and sometimes her younger sisters was suffocating her. She began to believe that if she stopped for even a second, everything would fall apart. Clara, on the other hand, lived on the edge. She wanted more from life. She wanted to follow her dreams, explore the world. But at the same time, she felt trapped by her family. Her frustration manifested in outbursts of anger, in harsh words that, as soon as she said them, she desperately wished to take back. Mia, the youngest, stayed on the sidelines. Always quiet, always observing, often feeling invisible amidst her older sister's fights. She longed for the connection they once had but didn't know how to fix what seemed so broken. Arguments at home had become constant. Small things, a task left undone, a misplaced word, quickly escalated into battles. Financial stress, the pressure of responsibilities, all contributed to this heavy atmosphere. And in the middle of this chaos, the sisters started to drift apart. What once was love and support had turned into a burden. They knew something was wrong. They felt lost, disconnected, not only from each other but also from themselves. And it was on one of those days, when despair seemed greater than any possible solution, that they decided to leave the house. Without direction, without a destination, just to breathe, to try to escape, even for a brief moment, from the prison that their own family had become. That afternoon, the three sisters wandered aimlessly to the nearest park. The sky was cloudy, and the fresh breeze contrasted with the suffocating heat of the emotions each of them carried. Sophia, Clara, and Mia didn't say a word during the walk, each immersed in their own thoughts, questioning how they had gotten to this point. They sat down on a wooden bench, exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. The park was full of life around them, children running, couples strolling, the distant sound of a bubbling fountain. But for the three sisters, everything seemed distant, as if they were trapped in a bubble of tension and silence. Mia was the first to notice. A man in simple clothes, sitting under a tree with a posture that exuded tranquility. He seemed completely oblivious to the chaos of the park around him, as if he were in his own world, at peace. It was hard not to notice him. There was something about him that made you want to take a second look. Maybe it was the way he gazed at the sky or the calm that seemed to radiate from his mere existence. She nudged Sophia and discreetly pointed in the man's direction. The three sisters watched him in silence for a moment. He noticed, but didn't seem bothered. Instead, he smiled, a peaceful, almost paternal smile. And then, without hurry, he got up and began walking towards them. When he stopped in front of them, there was a feeling of discomfort. Who was this man? What did he want? But before they could say anything, he spoke in a calm but deep voice. You seem to be carrying a heavy burden. May I sit? They nodded, more out of curiosity than anything else. The man, who would later introduce himself as a monk, sat beside them. He said nothing for a moment, just looked around as if he were absorbing the environment. Finally, he looked at the sisters and asked, have you ever thought that perhaps what you're going through right now won't last forever? Those simple words hit the three of them hard. What did he know about their problems? How could he understand the pain they were carrying? But something in his calmness, in his presence, kept them from pulling away. And then, he began to speak. The monk adjusted himself on the bench, his posture relaxed but with an air of being deeply in tune with the moment. He looked at the sisters, his eyes gentle but penetrating, as if he could see beyond the unspoken words, beyond the masks they wore to hide their pain. You are suffering, he began. I can see it in your faces. Whatever it is you're facing feels unbearable right now, doesn't it? Like it will never end. Clara, always the most impulsive, scoffed. It's something like that. The monk wasn't fazed. Suffering makes us believe that. It makes it seem as though the pain we feel is eternal, that it will never go away. But the truth, my young ones, is that suffering, like all things in life, is impermanent. Sophia frowned, clearly skeptical. And how does that help? Knowing suffering passes doesn't change the fact that it's still here. It still hurts. The monk nodded slowly. You're right. There's no way to escape the pain of the present. But knowing that it's temporary can change how you face it. If you stop resisting it, stop fighting against it, and simply accept that it is part of a cycle, you'll start to realize that suffering has its own end. He paused, letting his words sink in. Mia, the most introspective of the three, was completely absorbed, reflecting deeply on what the monk was saying. Accept the pain, and wait for it to pass, she whispered. The monk smiled softly. It's not just about waiting. It's about understanding that life, like a storm, runs its course. If you try to resist the rain, you'll get soaked. But if you know the rain won't last forever, you can take shelter, find peace, until the sun shines again. The monk continued, looking at each of them with an expression that conveyed not only wisdom but genuine compassion. He knew that, as powerful as his words might be, they would need time to make sense. But he also knew that inside each of those sisters, something was already shifting. When you accept impermanence, when you understand that nothing is fixed, neither joy nor pain, you begin to see life in a different way. The bad things that seem unbearable now, they will change. Just like the good things that we often try to hold on to with all our might. Change is the only certainty we have. Clara, always so prone to fits of anger, crossed her arms and frowned, still struggling with the idea. But does that mean we should just accept the bad things? And let them continue? The monk shook his head, a subtle smile on his lips. Acceptance isn't the same as resignation. Acceptance is seeing things as they are, without illusions, without resistance. When you accept, you can act with clarity. Constant resistance, constant fighting only brings more pain. You three are fighting against the current, trying to control what cannot be controlled. That's what's causing the suffering. Sophia, who had spent so much time trying to keep everything under control, felt a knot form in her stomach. She had dedicated her life to trying to fix everything, the finances, the fights, the disconnection. But for the first time, she realized that maybe it was her incessant attempt to control everything that was breaking her inside. Maybe the first step was accepting that she couldn't fix everything. And that didn't make her weak. It made her human. Mia, with her quieter, more contemplative nature, asked softly, "So what should we do?" "Just let the storm pass." The monk looked at her kindly. It's not about letting things happen passively. It's about stopping the fight against the current. When you accept that life is impermanent, that storms come and go, you learn to remain at peace, even in the midst of chaos. The monk paused, looking at the sky, which was starting to clear. The clouds were slowly moving, allowing the timid sunlight to break through. He pointed toward the horizon. Do you see those clouds? Right now, they seem dark, covering the sun, bringing a sense of uncertainty. But look more closely. They are moving. Nothing in the sky stays the same. Just like these clouds, your suffering is also in motion. It is not fixed. The sisters followed his gaze, watching the sky. There was a simple beauty in that metaphor. They had spent so much time staring at the clouds, focusing on what was blocking the light, that they had forgotten that the sun was always there, waiting to shine again. Sophia felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. She had always believed that to be strong, she needed to fight everything, all the time. But now, looking at those clouds, something inside her finally gave way. Maybe that was what she needed, to stop fighting so much and accept that she couldn't control what was beyond her hands. For the first time in a long time, she felt a lightness, as if a part of the burden had been lifted. Clara, on the other hand, was still grappling with her own feelings. What if the storm doesn't pass? What if things never go back to the way they were before? The monk looked at her, his eyes full of compassion. Things never go back to exactly the way they were, Clara. But maybe that's what's most beautiful about life. What comes after a storm is not what was there before. It's something new. Different. The storm leaves its marks, changes the landscape. But in the end, it brings renewal. Mia, always the most reflective, watched everything in silence, absorbing the depth of what the monk was saying. The storm that once seemed endless now seemed manageable. Not because there was a magic solution, but because she was beginning to understand that it didn't need to be eternal. Nothing was eternal. The silence that followed was filled with a new understanding. The sisters, who had been so disconnected for so long, now looked at each other differently. They were no longer adversaries fighting on opposite sides of a family war. Now, they were companions on the same journey, each facing their own internal storms, but together. Sophia, who had spent so much time trying to be the fortress of the family, felt a tear run down her cheek. But this time, it wasn't a tear of despair, but of relief. She turned to her sisters, her voice soft, almost trembling. I'm sorry. I always tried to fix everything by myself, as if it was my responsibility. But I'm not that strong. I need you. Clara looked at Sophia, surprised by her older sister's vulnerability. Always so firm, so determined to control everything, now she was opening her heart. It touched her deeply. She moved closer and placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. I'm sorry too. I fought so much without really thinking about what I was doing. I thought I was fighting for myself, but I was just pushing you away. Mia, who had been the silent observer, now felt ready to speak. I miss how we used to be, too. But maybe we don't need to go back to how we were. Maybe we can build something new. Together. The monk, who had been watching in silence, smiled softly. He knew that the real work wasn't in his words but in the connection the sisters were rebuilding. He hadn't come to solve their problems but to show them the way. The rest was in their hands. The park around them was quieter now, as if it reflected the peace that was beginning to emerge within the sisters. The monk stood up slowly, realizing that his part in their story was complete. He looked at them with one last silent piece of advice in his eyes and began to walk away, without the need for grand farewells. The three sisters stayed there for a few moments, watching as he disappeared among the trees, his presence already leaving a deep mark on their hearts. The walk back home was quiet but full of meaning. Each step was a reflection of the new understanding they had reached, not about how to solve all of life's problems, but about how to face them together. Sophia, Clara, and Mia knew that the challenges would still be there. The fights with their parents, the financial difficulties, the uncertainties of the future. But now they had something more powerful than any immediate solution, the understanding that nothing, neither pain nor joy, lasted forever. And with that acceptance, they could face any storm. When they arrived home, the atmosphere felt different. Not because the problems had disappeared, but because they were different. Stronger. More connected. More aware that even in the midst of chaos, they could find peace if they allowed themselves to. Life, after all, was impermanent. And instead of being frightening, that was liberating. Thanks for watching. In this story, you met three sisters who were facing a temporary conflict, and after proper guidance, they were able to know the power of understanding and learn that nothing is permanent. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Share with your friends and leave your comments below about what you thought of this story. We always bring inspiring stories with teachings from modern life.